As You Like It. During the time that France was divided into provinces, or dukedoms as they were called, there reigned in one of these provinces a usurper who had overthrown and banished his elder brother, the lawful duke. The duke, who was thus driven from his dominions, retired with a few faithful followers to the forest of Arden. Here the good duke lived with his loving friends who had undertaken voluntary exile for his sake, while their land and revenues enriched the false usurper. They soon found the life of careless ease they led here sweeter than the pomp and uneasy splendor of a courtier's life. Here they lived like the old Robin Hood of England. To this forest many noble youths daily came from the court and spent the time carelessly, like those who lived in the golden age. In the summer they lay along under the fine shade of the large forest trees, watching the playful sports of the wild deer. So fond were they of these poor, dappled, unsuspecting creatures, who seemed to be the native inhabitants of the forest, that it grieved them to be forced to kill them to supply themselves with venison for food. When the cold winds of winter made the Duke feel that his fortunes had changed for the worse, he would endure it patiently and say, "These chilling winds which blow upon my body are true counselors. They do not flatter me, but give me a true picture of my condition. Though they bite me sharply, their tooth is not as keen as that of unkindness and ingratitude. Though they bite sharply, their tooth is not as keen as that of unkindness and ingratitude." The banished duke had an only daughter named Rosalind. The usurper, Duke Frederick, although he had banished her father, still retained Rosalind in his court as a companion for his own daughter Celia. A close friendship existed between these ladies, which the disagreement between their fathers did not in the least interrupt. Celia strove by every kindness in her power to make amends to Rosalind for the injustice of her own father in driving out the father of Rosalind. Whenever the thoughts of her father's banishment and her own dependence on the false usurper made Rosalind melancholy, Celia's whole care was to comfort and console her. One day, when Celia was talking in her usual kind manner to Rosalind, saying, "I pray you, Rosalind, my sweet cousin, be merry," a messenger entered from the Duke to tell them that if they wished to see a wrestling match, which was just going to begin, they must come instantly to the court before the palace. Celia, thinking it would amuse Rosalind, agreed to go and see it. In those times, wrestling was a favorite sport even in the courts of princes and before fair ladies and princesses. To this wrestling match, therefore, Celia and Rosalind went. They found that it was likely to prove a very tragic spectacle, for a large and powerful man, who had had long experience in the art of wrestling and had slain many men in contests of this kind, was just about to wrestle with a very young man who, because of his great youth and inexperience in the art, the spectators all thought would certainly be killed. When the Duke saw Celia and Rosalind, he said, "Well, daughter and niece, have you come here to see the wrestling? You will take little delight in it. The older man is so much stronger. Out of pity for this young man, I would wish to persuade him from wrestling. Speak to him, ladies, and see if you can convince him." The ladies were well pleased to perform this humane deed. At first, Celia pleaded with the young stranger not to try. Then Rosalind spoke so kindly to him and with such appreciation of the danger he was about to undergo that instead of being persuaded by her gentle words to give up the idea, he bent all his thoughts to distinguish himself by his courage in this lovely lady's eyes. He refused the request of Celia and Rosalind in such graceful and modest words that they felt still more concerned for him. He concluded his refusal by saying, "I am sorry to deny such fair and excellent ladies anything, but let your fair eyes and gentle wishes go with me to this test. If I be conquered in this, there is one shame that was never favored. If I am killed, there is one dead that is willing to die. I shall do my friends no wrong, for I have none to lament me. The world no injury, for in it I have nothing. For I only fill up a place in the world which may be better supplied when I have made it empty." And now the wrestling match began. Celia wished the young stranger might not be hurt, but Rosalind felt most for him. The friendless state which he said he was in, and the fact that he wished to die, made Rosalind think that he was, like herself, unfortunate. She pitied him so much and showed such anxiety about the danger he was in while wrestling that she might almost be said at that moment to have fallen in love with him. The kindness shown this unknown youth by these fair and noble ladies gave him courage and strength so that he performed wonders. In the end, he completely conquered his opponent, who was so badly hurt that for a while he was unable to speak or move. The Duke Frederick was much pleased with the courage and skill shown by this young stranger, and desired to know his name and parentage, planning to take him under his protection. The stranger said his name was Orlando, and that he was the youngest son of Sir Roland de Boys. Sir Roland de Boys, the father of Orlando, had been dead some years, but when he was living, he had been a true subject and dear friend of the banished Duke. Therefore, when Frederick heard Orlando was the son of his banished brother's friend, all his liking for this brave young man was changed into displeasure, and he left the place in very ill humor, hating to hear the very name of any of his brother's friends, and yet still admiring the valor of the youth. He said as he went out that he wished Orlando had been the son of any other man. Rosalind was delighted to hear that her new favorite was the son of her father's old friend, and she said to Celia, "My father loved Sir Roland de Boys. If I had known this young man was his son, I would have added tears to my pleas before he should have risked the match." The ladies then went up to him, and seeing him downcast at the sudden displeasure shown by the Duke, spoke kind and encouraging words to him. Rosalind, when they were leaving, turned back to speak some more pleasant things to the brave young son of her father's old friend. Then, taking a chain from around her neck, she said, "Gentlemen, wear this for me. I am out of favor with fortune, or I would give you a more valuable present." When the ladies were alone, Rosalind's talk being still of Orlando, Celia began to perceive her cousins had fallen in love with the handsome young wrestler, and she said to Rosalind, "Is it possible you should fall in love so suddenly?" Rosalind replied, "The Duke, my father, loved his father dearly. But," said Celia, Does it therefore follow that you should love his son dearly? For then I ought to hate him, for my father hated his father. Yet I do not hate Orlando. Frederick was enraged at the sight of Sir Rowland de Boys' son, which reminded him of the many friends the banished duke had among the nobility, having also been for some time displeased with his niece because the people praised her for her virtues and pitied her for her good father's sake. His malice suddenly broke out against her. While Celia and Rosalind were talking of Orlando, Frederick entered the room, and with looks full of anger, ordered Rosalind instantly to leave the palace and follow her father into banishment. To Celia, who in vain pleaded for her, he replied that he had only suffered Rosalind to stay upon her account. I did not then, said Celia, plead with you to let her stay, for I was too young at that time to realize her value. But now that I know her worth, and since we so long have slept together, risen at the same instant, learned, played, and eaten together, I cannot live without her company, Frederick replied. But now that I know her worth, and since we so long have slept together, risen at the same instant, learned, played, and eaten together, I cannot live without her company. Frederick replied, she is too artful for you. Her smoothness, her very silence, and her patience speak to the people, and they pity her. You are a fool to plead for her, for you will seem more bright and virtuous when she is gone. Therefore, open not your lips in her favor, for the doom which I have passed upon her is beyond recall. When Celia found she could not prevail upon her father to let Rosalind remain with her, she generously resolved to accompany her. Leaving her father's palace that night, she went along with her friend to seek Rosalind's father, the banished duke, in the forest of Arden. Before they set out, Celia considered that it would be unsafe for two young ladies to travel in the rich clothes they then wore. She therefore proposed that they should disguise their rank by dressing themselves like country maids. Rosalind said it would be a still greater protection if one of them was to be dressed like a man. So it was quickly agreed on between them that as Rosalind was the taller, she should wear the dress of a young countryman. Celia should be clothed like a country lass, and they should say they were brother and sister. Rosalind said she would be called Ganymede, and Celia chose the name of Aliena. In this disguise, and taking their money and jewels to defray their expenses, these fair princesses set out on their long journey. For the forest of Arden was a long way off, beyond the boundaries of the duke's dominions. The Lady Rosalind, or Ganymede as she must now be called, with her manly garb, seemed to have taken on a manly courage. The faithful friendship Celia had shown in accompanying Rosalind so many weary miles made the new brother, in appreciation for this true love, act as cheerfully as if he were indeed Ganymede, the rustic and stout-hearted brother of the gentle village maiden Aliena. When at last they came to the forest of Arden, they no longer found the convenient inns and good accommodations they had met with on the road. Being in want of food and rest, Ganymede, who had so merrily cheered his sister with pleasant speeches and happy remarks all the way, now admitted to Aliena that he was so weary he felt as if he could disgrace his man's apparel and cry like a woman. Aliena declared she could go no farther. Then again, Ganymede tried to recollect that it was a man's duty to comfort and console a woman, as the weaker one. To seem courageous to his new sister, he said, "Come, be of good heart, my sister Aliena. We are now at the end of our trip in the forest of Arden." But pretended manliness and forced courage would no longer support them. For though they were in the forest of Arden, they knew not where to find the Duke, and here the journey of these weary ladies might have come to a sad conclusion, for they might have lost themselves and perished for want of food. But providentially, as they were sitting on the grass, almost dying with fatigue and despairing of any relief, a countryman chanced to pass that way. Ganymede once more tried to speak with a manly boldness, saying, "Shepherd, if love or gold can in this desert place procure us entertainment, I pray you bring us where we may rest ourselves. For this young maid, my sister, is much fatigued with traveling and is fainting for want of food." The man replied that he was only a servant to a shepherd, and that his master's house was just going to be sold. Therefore they would find but poor entertainment. However, if they would go with him, he said, they should be welcome to what there was. They followed the man with the prospect that relief was near, giving them fresh strength. They bought the house and sheep of the shepherd, and took the man who had conducted them to the shepherd's house to wait on them. Being by this means so fortunately provided with a neat cottage, and well supplied with provisions, they agreed to stay here till they could learn in what part of the forest the Duke dwelt. When they were rested after the fatigue of their journey, they began to like their new way of life, and almost fancied themselves the shepherd and shepherdess they pretended to be. Yet sometimes Ganymede remembered he had once been the same lady Rosalind who had so dearly loved the brave Orlando, because he was the son of old Sir Rowland, her father's friend. Also, though Ganymede thought that Orlando was many miles distant, even as many weary miles as they had traveled, yet it soon appeared that Orlando was also in the forest of Arden. In this manner, this strange event came to pass. Orlando was the youngest son of Sir Rowland de Boys, who, when he died, left him, Orlando being then very young, in the care of his elder brother Oliver. The father charged Oliver, if he wished his blessing, to give his brother a good education and provide for him as fitted the dignity of their ancient house. Oliver proved an unworthy brother. Disregarding the commands of his dying father, he never sent his brother to school, but kept him at home, untaught and entirely neglected. But in his nature and in the noble qualities of his mind, Orlando so much resembled his excellent father that without any advantages of education, he seemed like a youth who had been brought up with the utmost care. Moreover, Oliver so envied the fine person and dignified manners of his untutored brother that at last he wished to destroy him. To bring this about, he induced people to persuade Orlando to enter a match with the famous wrestler who, as has been before related, had killed so many men. Now, it was this cruel brother's neglect of him which made Orlando say he wished to die, being so friendless. When, contrary to Oliver's wicked hopes, his brother proved victorious, Oliver's envy and malice knew no bounds. He swore he would burn the chamber where Orlando slept. He was overheard making this vow by one who had been an old and faithful servant to their father, and who loved Orlando because he resembled Sir Rowland. This old man went out to meet him when he returned from the Duke's palace, and when he saw Orlando, the peril his dear young master was in made him break out into these passionate exclamations. "Oh, my gentle master, my sweet master, you memory of old Sir Rowland, why are you virtuous? Why are you gentle, strong, and valiant? Why were you so eager to overcome the famous wrestler? News of your success has come too swiftly home before you." Orlando, wondering what all this meant, asked him what was the matter. Then the old man told him how his wicked brother, jealous of the love all people bore him, and now hearing of the fame he had gained by his victory in the Duke's palace, intended to destroy him by setting fire to his chamber that night. In conclusion, the old man advised him to escape the danger he was in by instant flight. Knowing Orlando had no money, Adam, for that was the good old man's name, had brought with him his own little hoard, and he said, "I have 500 crowns, wages I saved under your father, and put aside for the time when my old limbs should become unfit for service. Take the money, and may God, who feeds the sparrows as well as the ravens, be comfort to my age. Here is the gold. All this I give to you. Let me be your servant. Though I look old, I will do the service of a younger man in all your business and necessities." "Oh, good old man," said Orlando, "how well you remind me of the old type of faithful servant. You do not belong to these times. We will go along together, and before your youthful wages are spent, I shall find some means for our support." Together, then, this faithful servant and his loved master set out. They traveled on, uncertain what course to pursue, till they came to the forest of Arden, and there they found themselves in the same distress for want of food that Ganymede and Aliena had been. They wandered on, seeking some human dwelling, till they were almost spent with hunger and fatigue. Adam at last said, "Oh, my dear master, I die for want of food. I can go no farther." He then laid himself down, thinking to make that place his grave, and bade his dear master farewell. Orlando, seeing him in this weak state, took his old servant up in his arms and carried him under the shelter of some pleasant trees, saying to him, "Cheerily, old Adam, rest your weary limbs here a while, and do not talk of dying." Orlando then searched about to find some food. He happened to arrive at that part of the forest where the Duke was. He and his friends were just going to eat their dinner, the royal Duke being seated on the grass under no other canopy than the shady cover of some large trees. Orlando, whom hunger had made desperate, drew his sword, intending to take their meat by force, and said, "Forbear and eat no more. I must have your food." The Duke asked him if distress had made him so bold, or if he were a rude despiser of good manners. Orlando replied that he was dying of hunger. At this, the Duke told him he was welcome to sit down and eat with them. Orlando, hearing him speak so gently, put up his sword and blushed with shame at the rude manner in which he had demanded their food. "Pardon me, I pray you," said he. "I thought that all things were savage here, and therefore I made stern demands. But whatever men you are, that in this desert, under the shade of melancholy boughs, lose and neglect the creeping hours of time, if ever you have looked on better days, if ever you have been where bells have knolled to church, if ever you have sat at any good man's feast, if ever from your eyelids you have wiped a tear, and know what it is to pity or to be pitied, may gentle speeches now move you to do me human courtesy. The Duke replied, True it is that we are men who have seen better days, though we now make our home in this wild forest. We have lived in towns and cities, and have with holy bell been knolled to church, have sat at good men's feasts, and from our eyes have wiped the drops which sacred pity has brought forth. Therefore sit down and take our refreshment as much as you need. There is an old poor man, answered Orlando, who has limped after me many a weary step in pure love, obsessed at once with two sad infirmities, age and hunger. Till he be satisfied, I must not touch a bit. Go, find him out, and bring him hither, said the Duke. We will refrain from eating till you return. Then Orlando went like a doe to find its fawn and give it food. Presently he returned, bringing Adam in his arms. The Duke said, Set down your venerable burden. You are both welcome. They fed the old man and cheered his heart, and he revived and recovered his health and strength again. The Duke inquired who Orlando was. When he found that he was the son of his old friend Sir Rowland de Boys, he took him under his protection, and Orlando and his old servant lived with the Duke in the forest. Orlando arrived in the forest not many days after Ganymede and Aliena came there, and, as has been before related, bought the shepherd's cottage. Ganymede and Aliena were strangely surprised to find the name of Rosalind carved on the trees, and love sonnets fastened to them, all addressed to Rosalind. While they were wondering how this could be, they met Orlando, and they noticed the chain which Rosalind had given him about his neck. Orlando little thought that Ganymede was the fair Princess Rosalind, who, by her noble condescension and favor, had so won his heart that he passed his whole time in carving her name upon the trees and writing sonnets in praise of her beauty. However, being much pleased with the graceful air of this pretty shepherd youth, he entered into conversation with him and thought he saw a likeness in Ganymede to his beloved Rosalind, except that he lacked the dignified manner of that noble lady. For Ganymede, in the forward manner often seen in adolescence, with much archness and humor, talked to Orlando of a certain lover, who, said he, haunts our forest, and spoils our young trees with carving Rosalind upon their barks. He also hangs odes upon hawthorns and elegies on brambles, all praising this same Rosalind. If I could find this lover, I would give him some good old counsel that would soon cure him of his love. Orlando confessed that he was the fond lover of whom he spoke, and asked Ganymede to give him the good counsel he talked of. The remedy Ganymede proposed, and the counsel he gave him, was that Orlando should come every day to the cottage where he and his sister Aliena dwelt. And then, said Ganymede, I will pretend to be Rosalind, and you shall pretend to court me in the same manner as you would do if I were Rosalind. Then I will imitate the fantastic ways of whimsical ladies to their lovers, till I make you ashamed of your love. This is the way I propose to cure you." Orlando had no great faith in the remedy, yet he agreed to come every day to Ganymede's cottage and feign a playful courtship. Every day Orlando visited Ganymede and Aliena, and Orlando called the shepherd Ganymede his Rosalind, and every day talked over all the fine words and flattering compliments which young men delight to use when they court their mistresses. It does not appear, however, that Ganymede made any progress in curing Orlando of his love for Rosalind. Though Orlando thought all this was but a sportive play, not dreaming that Ganymede was his very Rosalind, yet the opportunity it gave him of saying all the fine things he had in his heart pleased his fancy almost as well as it did Ganymede's, who enjoyed the secret jest in knowing these fine love speeches were all addressed to the right person. In this manner, many days passed pleasantly with these young people. The good-natured Aliena, seeing it made Ganymede happy, let him have his own way. Entertained by the mock courtship, she did not care to remind Ganymede that the Lady Rosalind had not yet made herself known to the Duke her father, whose hiding place in the forest they had learned from Orlando. Ganymede met the Duke one day and had some talk with him, and the Duke asked of what parentage he came. Ganymede answered that he came of as good parentage as he did, which made the Duke smile, for he did not suspect the pretty shepherd boy came of royal lineage. Then, seeing the Duke look well and happy, Ganymede was content to put off all further explanation for a few days longer. One morning, as Orlando was going to visit Ganymede, he saw a man lying asleep on the ground with a large green snake twisted about his neck. The snake, seeing Orlando approach, glided away among the bushes. Orlando went nearer and then discovered a lioness crouching with her head on the ground, watching cat-like, waiting till the sleeping man awoke. For it said, Orlando went nearer and then discovered a lioness. Orlando went nearer and then discovered a lioness, crouching with her head on the ground, watching cat-like, waiting till the sleeping man awoke. For it is said that lions will prey on nothing that is dead or sleeping. It seemed as if Orlando had been sent by Providence to free the man from the danger of the snake and the lioness. But when Orlando looked in the man's face, he perceived that the sleeper who was exposed to this double peril was his own brother Oliver, who had so cruelly treated him and had threatened to destroy him by fire. He was almost tempted to leave him a prey to the hungry lioness, but brotherly affection and the gentleness of his nature soon overcame his first anger against his brother. He drew his sword, attacked the lioness, and slew her. Thus he saved his brother's life, warding off both the venomous snake and the furious lioness. But before Orlando could conquer the lioness, she had torn one of his arms with her sharp claws. While Orlando was engaged with the lioness, Oliver awoke. When he saw that his brother Orlando, whom he had so cruelly treated, was saving him from the fury of a wild beast at the risk of his own life, shame and remorse at once seized him. He repented of his unworthy conduct and asked with many tears his brother's pardon for the injuries he had done to him. Orlando rejoiced to see him so penitent and readily forgave him. They embraced each other, and from that hour Oliver loved Orlando with a true brotherly affection, though he had come to the forest bent on his destruction. The wound in Orlando's arm having bled very much, he found himself too weak to go to visit Ganymede. Therefore he asked his brother to go and tell Ganymede, whom, said Orlando, I in sport do call my Rosalind, the accident which had befallen him. There Oliver then went and told Ganymede and Aliena how Orlando had saved his life. When he had finished the story of Orlando's bravery and his own fortunate escape, he confessed to them that he was Orlando's brother, who had so cruelly treated him. Then he told them of their reconciliation. The sincere sorrow that Oliver expressed for his offenses made such a lively impression on the kind heart of Aliena that she instantly fell in love with him. Oliver, observing how much she pitied him for the distress he told her he felt over his wrongdoing, as suddenly fell in love with her. But while love was thus stealing into the hearts of Aliena and Oliver, he was no less busy with Ganymede. Hearing of the danger Orlando had been in, and of his having been wounded by the lioness, Ganymede fainted. When he recovered, he pretended that he had swooned while playing the imaginary character of Rosalind, and said to Oliver, Tell your brother Orlando how real it looked when I pretended to faint. But Oliver saw by the paleness of his complexion that he had really fainted, and much wondering at the weakness of the young man, he said, Well, if you did pretend, take good heart and pretend to be a man. So I do, replied Ganymede, truly, but I should have been a woman by right. The usurper, enraged at the flight of his daughter Cilia, and hearing that every day men of great worth made their way to the forest of Arden to join the lawful duke in his exile, was very envious that his brother should be so highly respected in his misfortune. He put himself at the head of a large force and advanced towards the forest, intending to seize his brother and put him with all his faithful followers to the sword. But by a wonderful intercession of Providence, this bad brother was dissuaded from carrying out his evil plan. For just as he entered the outskirts of the wild forest, he was met by an old religious man, a hermit, with whom he had much talk, and who in the end completely turned his heart from his wicked scheme. Thenceforward he became a true penitent and resolved, giving up his unjustly acquired lands, to spend the remainder of his days in a religious house. The first act of his newly conceived penitence was to send a messenger to his brother, as has been related, to offer to restore to him his dukedom, which he had usurped so long, and with it the lands and revenues of his friends, the faithful followers of his days of ill fortune. This joyful news, as unexpected as it was welcome, came opportunely to heighten the festivity and rejoicings at the wedding of the princesses. Cilia complimented her cousin on this good fortune which had happened to the duke, Rosalind's father, and wished her joy very sincerely, though she herself was no longer heir to the dukedom. By this restoration which her father had made, Rosalind was now the heir. The love of these two cousins was completely unmixed with anything of jealousy or of envy. The Duke had now an opportunity of rewarding those true friends who had stayed with him in his banishment. These worthy followers, though they had patiently shared his ill fortune, were very well pleased to return in peace and prosperity to the palace of their lawful duke. Oliver made this visit a very long one, and when at last he returned to his brother, he had much news to tell him. For besides the story of Ganymede's fainting at hearing that Orlando was wounded, Oliver told him how he had fallen in love with the fair shepherdess Aliena. He said that she had listened to his vows of love with favor, even at their first meeting. He talked to his brother as if it were almost settled that he should marry Aliena, saying that he so well loved her that he would live here as a shepherd and settle his estate and house at home upon Orlando. "You have my consent," said Orlando. "Let your wedding be tomorrow, and I will invite the Duke and his friends. Go and persuade your shepherdess to agree to this. She is now alone. For look, here comes her brother." Oliver went to Aliena, and Ganymede, whom Orlando had perceived approaching, came to inquire after the health of his wounded friend. When Orlando and Ganymede began to talk over the sudden love which had taken place between Oliver and Aliena, Oliver said he had advised his brother to persuade his fair shepherdess to be married on the morrow, and then he added how much he wished to be married on the same day to his Rosalind. Ganymede, who well approved of this arrangement, replied that if Orlando really loved Rosalind as well as he professed to do, he should have his wish. On the morrow, he said he would undertake to make Rosalind appear in her own person and willing to marry Orlando. This seemingly wonderful event, which, as Ganymede was the Lady Rosalind, he could so easily perform, he pretended he would bring to pass by the aid of magic, which he said he had learned of an uncle who was a famous magician. The fond lover Orlando, half believing and half doubting what he heard, asked Ganymede if he really meant what he said. "By my life I do," said Ganymede. "Therefore put on your best clothes and invite the Duke and your friends to your wedding, for if you desire to be married tomorrow to Rosalind, she shall be here." The next morning, Oliver, having obtained the consent of Aliena, they came into the presence of the Duke, and with them also came Orlando. They being all assembled to celebrate this double marriage, and as yet only one of the brides having appeared. There was much wondering and conjecture, but they thought that, for the most part, Ganymede was making fun of Orlando. The Duke, hearing that it was his own daughter that was to be brought in this strange way, asked Orlando if he believed the shepherd boy could really do what he had promised. While Orlando was answering that he knew not what to think, Ganymede entered and asked the Duke if he brought his daughter, whether he would consent to her marriage with Orlando. "That I would," said the Duke, "if I had kingdoms to give with her." Ganymede then said to Orlando, "And you say you will marry her if I bring her here?" "That I would," said Orlando, "if I were king of many kingdoms." Ganymede and Aliena then went out together, and Ganymede, throwing off his male attire and being once more dressed in woman's apparel, quickly became Rosalind without the power of magic. Aliena, changing her country garb for her own rich clothes, was with as little trouble transformed into the Lady Celia. While they were gone, the Duke said to Orlando that he thought the shepherd Ganymede very like his daughter Rosalind, and Orlando said he also had observed the resemblance. They had no time to wonder how all this would end, for Rosalind and Celia in their own clothes entered, no longer pretending that it was by the power of magic that she came there. Rosalind threw herself on her knees before her father and begged his blessing. It seemed so wonderful to all present that she should so suddenly appear that it might well have passed for magic. But Rosalind would no longer trifle with her father, and told him the story of her banishment and her dwelling in the forest as a shepherd boy, her cousin Celia passing as her sister. The Duke ratified the consent he had already given to the marriage, and Orlando and Rosalind, Oliver and Celia were married at the same time. And though their wedding could not be celebrated in this wild forest with any of the parade or splendor usual on such occasions, yet a happier wedding day was never passed. While they were eating their venison under the cool shade of the pleasant trees, as if nothing should be wanting to complete the happiness of this good Duke and the true lovers, an unexpected messenger arrived to tell the Duke the joyful news that his dukedom had been restored to him.